think for me, my background is in international relations. That's where my training lies. And for me, I was inspired by, I think, sort of the absence of the individual experience, often in IR. Of course, as we know, sort of traditional IR is very state-centric. There's been a pretty substantial push, a movement away from that, or at least away from that being the only perspective on IR. But still, even in like more critical accounts that do look at sort of memory and trauma and identity, we're still very absent or distant from the individual experience, or what I call the lived experience. So how the everyday occurs and how trauma interacts with or influences sort of the everyday. And this was something that was really important for me in my thesis, and that's why I place so much emphasis on the lived experience and understanding what people who live it have to say, because I do think there's huge potential for IR to expand and grow and learn from people living their day-to-day lives, and how power and politics and international relations enter and influence everyday lives. So that's something that really inspired me there. And I find the sort of interaction of concepts from psychiatry and psychology into politics incredibly interesting. And this sort of interdisciplinary use of terminology, I think, needs more exploration. Like when IR often borrows terms from other disciplines, can be problematic because there's less engagement with the historical trajectory of that term, where that term came from, what are the ontological and epistemological foundations of that term, which I believe have a huge impact on the politics of when that term is used. So trauma is an example of that. I believe that it has incredibly specific sort of ontological and epistemological foundations, particularly based on the Western experience, and it's used often quite casually in sort of colloquial everyday life and language, but also in politics and international relations as well. So for me, it was really important to trace more specifically what that term means, and looking at it in a context that is beyond sort of the Western area in which it was defined. So what does it mean if we look at it in South Africa? How has that been translated from this very Western concept? And what does it mean when we look at it in another context? So that was really important for me as well. And those were sort of the two main strands, I think, of my thesis there, were looking at the lived experience and sort of trying to really understand a concept that is incredibly complex and contested, but utilized often very liberally. So how can we understand what it does? There's often a lot of talk about, in academia, that feeling of what people call like imposter syndrome, right? Asking, why am I here? Why do I deserve, or what have I done to deserve to be here, to ask these questions, to make these contributions to the academy? And I think that feeling of imposter syndrome is enhanced when you identify as female in the academy, because there are fewer of us to look up to, I guess, or, you know, most of these sort of boundary setting works, or the people that you see often as sort of well-known names in the field, are often men, often white Western men. And so I think that contributes to this idea, like this feeling of imposter syndrome. But I do think, and I personally see, there's a huge movement towards like expanding IR. I mean, surrounding myself with a network of really inspiring young female academics has helped me grow a lot as a person, but also as an academic and as a scholar. And so for me, that sort of idea of like solidarity and community is really important, and has like a potential to sort of combat that imposter syndrome and make you realize, like, no, I'm here, I deserve to be here, and we all, like, all of these voices need to be heard in academia. I think IR, again, because it's quite a young discipline, does maybe suffer a bit more than that, because it's had less of a history of like contestation and challenges to the discipline. So it's still sort of like pushing against that. the imposter syndrome can be hard sometimes, but yeah, we have to try and fight against it, I think.